Hello my beautiful friends, it's Amanda here, and today we're talking about some new mini palettes coming from ColourPop. These are all little jewel toned 4-pan palettes. They're dropping on Thursday, December 23rd at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So check your time zones. That's 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is the time zone I'm in. These should be priced at $9 a piece, just based on the fact that they are the exact same components as the previous little quads in the same clear packaging. So I'm pretty sure that we can safely assume that these will be priced at $9 a piece, and you should be able to use codes on this launch. You can always use my affiliate code, it's just Amanda, and that will save you 10% on most purchases on the ColourPop site. Huge thank you to everybody who does choose to support the channel in this way, because it makes a really big difference to me. So thank you for all of your support throughout this past year. I just genuinely really appreciate it. And let's get into these palettes now. The Stay Jewel collection has 6 quads, and they're all these different gemstone themes, and we can expect to see jewel tones across the board, which you know I love. I'm a big fan of jewel tones. Let's take a close-up look at each one of these palettes individually, starting with the That Topaz palette. Each one of these quads has 2 shimmers and 2 mattes. They are the exact same components as the other little quads that we've seen in this layout, which means that, you know, they don't have shade names printed inside, and these are not the magnetic pans. All of these little square quads in the plastic packaging are glued in. Now here's a close-up look at the swatches, finger swatches on top and then brush swatches below. No primer, done with a dry brush, all of the same good stuff we always go through for my swatches. Now a couple of comparisons. First up is It's a Mood. This one's pretty similar. I mean, I guess the shimmers are a little bit different, but probably not noticeable enough to really be able to discern that on the eye. That's kind of the same story with all of these comparisons. The Nude Mood is not quite as golden yellow undertone on the shimmers, but the mattes are pretty much a dead-on match. And then the Bare Necessities palette, always a go-to for me for neutral palette comparisons. And we sort of see the same thing here. I think this one's pretty similar as well. It would look pretty close to the same on the eye, just not quite as yellow. Now, speaking of yellow, we're going to talk about the Citrine You and Me palette. Get it? It's like Between You and Me, Citrine You and Me. You probably got it. No eye safety warnings on this one either. In fact, there's only 1 shade in this entire collection. We're going to look at that later. Of course, it appears in the red palette. Here we see 2 shimmers on top, 2 mattes below. These 2 shimmers look way more similar in swatch than they do in the pan, in my opinion. And this palette really performs better with the brush. The finger swatches just weren't quite as smooth as the brush swatches. Now, the It's a Mood comparisons are way more similar for this one. I think these are pretty darn similar. Again, I don't think you'd be able to really tell the difference once these were applied to the eye. And the California Love palette was the first one that came to mind for me for this comparison because of these orangey tones. And you can see here, very similar. So if you already have the California Love palette, you definitely do not need to pick up this Citrine palette. And surprisingly, not quite as similar as I expected with the Bare Necessities palette. I do think you could get pretty close eye look wise, but it's not really giving that marigold orange type of tone. Now it's the Really Ruby palette's turn. This one's a lot more pinky and not quite as intensely primary red as I was expecting, But I did want to point out that there is just one shade here that has that pigment warning. It's this one, A Fortune. Just make sure you patch test that one before you use it. I will link my video down below that explains more about patch testing. Now let's look at the swatches. I don't dislike these colors. It just wasn't really quite what I was expecting for a ruby palette. I really wanted to see a very primary red. However, compared to It's a Mood, this is way more red than what we were getting from It's a Mood. So in the context of this comparison, it is really ruby. But I do want to show you the wine and only comparison because I think that the wine palette is a lot more red than the ruby palette is. And formula-wise, the wine and only mattes were a lot smoother and a lot easier to get a nice opaque swatch. Last up for this round of comparisons is the now discontinued X's and O's palette, which is almost a dead ringer for this ruby palette. So if you still have X's and O's hiding in a drawer somewhere, you definitely do not need the really ruby palette. Now we have the purple palette. I'm not sure why they went with agate instead of amethyst for this palette, but I don't really care because I love purple. It's my favorite eyeshadow color to wear. And we're also getting a really pretty duochrome shade in here, which always is exciting for me. So overall, this is not a super unique color story, but it is still a color story that I like, so I'm not too mad at it. And I really love this shade Psychic. It's kind of like a dusty plum color. I think that's really, really pretty. As far as the comparisons go today, the It's a Mood is the least similar to Gotta Agate. The purples in It's a Mood are definitely more blue-based purples, and Gotta Agate looks a lot warmer and more red compared to the It's a Mood purples. Now, the Or Kid You Not palette has 3 out of the 4 pretty darn similar shades. It's just that first duochrome shade that there's not really a similar match in Or Kid You Not. However, there is a pretty close match in the It's My Pleasure palette. So if you have Or Kid You Not and It's My Pleasure, then you most definitely already have these Gotta Agate shades in your collection. Now it's time for some greens, and Emerald Way is our green palette in this collection, and this is by far one of the most unique palettes in this little mini palette collection. I really like how these shades have a little bit of a blue undertone. They're not quite those warm olive kind of golden greens that we see a lot coming from the ColourPop greens. And when you see these swatched onto the skin, I think they just look so pretty and unique, especially the more mid-tone matte called Chromium. It's such a pretty green shade, and you'll see what I mean when you see it compared to the It's a Mood palette. These are those more golden olivey greens. They're way more yellow. And there are a lot of greens that people probably wanted to see compared to this one, but I'm telling you, I went through all of my ColourPop palettes, and these were really the closest ones I could come up with. The Mandalorian palette was way too gray and yellow. Just My Luck, it was way too bright. I'm sure if I pieced together one shade here and there, I could have made some more closely matched comparisons, but as far as entire palettes go, I really tried to pull the closest, greenest palettes that I could find. Our very last palette is this little blue quad called Set on Sapphire. Let's just take a moment for the accidentally matching nails on this one because this was absolutely a complete fluke this time, but you know, sometimes I do paint them to match what I'm reviewing. Maybe that's a little bit extra, but today it just worked out in my favor. Here are the swatches for this palette. I would say these are some of the nicest shimmer shades and some of the drier mattes of this entire bunch. Now, when it comes to comparisons, the It's a Mood palette has some decent comparisons for the shimmers, but not quite so much for the mattes, so it's sort of the opposite of the more neutral palettes. And when it comes to something like the Blue Moon palette, for example, our monochromatic blue palette, it's much, much brighter, which is what I experienced comparing a lot of the monochromatic palettes, those original 9 pans, to these new, more jewel toned quads. I do think that the Social Butterfly palette, which came out during the Cyber Monday vaults, has a pretty decent comparison, especially for that denim blue shade that was very difficult to match. Because of the name of this collection, I really wanted to do a full scale comparison to the Play It Jewel palette, and I'll tell you, this first half we have a lot of very, very similar shades. As you can see, these warm, golden, neutral, and pink shades very much already exist in the Play It Jewel palette. But where we really diverge are the greens and blues. Even the purples are really, really, really similar, almost a dead-on match. So I think that the standouts in this collection are definitely the green and blue palettes. And that's a purple lover talking. So my top pick is actually an Emerald Way. I just think that one's really special. But if you are a blue lover, then Set on Sapphire is another pretty unique pick in my opinion. I'm just more likely to wear green than blue, and I think that these would pair really nicely together too if you wanted to combine one of the more neutrals with something a little bit more unique. I would love to wear the Gotta Agate, that's the purple palette, and an Emerald Way together. I just think that would be such a beautiful combination. But now's the time when I want to hear what you think about this collection. Do any of these catch your eye? Are you going to be picking any of them up? Let me know which ones are your favorites. I always love to hear what you think about things too. Make sure you leave all your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. And I love your cute little face. Okay, bye!